Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
Imagine pouring, millions of dollars, years of intense physical labor, and basically the absolute limits of 19th century engineering into this unstoppable commercial empire.
Right. A massive landscape-altering marvel.
Exactly. Something that completely transformed the local economy overnight. But then imagine watching that entire empire get literally battered into splinters by 1 million tons of ice in just a single afternoon.
Oh, it is. It's just one of the most brutal realities of early infrastructure. I mean, you can engineer your way out of geographical constraints all day long, but you really cannot engineer your way out of an angry watershed.
Yeah, nature always gets a vote.
She gets the final vote. And what makes this particular story so compelling to look at today is the sheer panic that motivated the project in the first place.
Panic is honestly the perfect word for it, because to understand why an inland city would attempt to just conquer a river, you have to look at this massive wave of, well, they called it canal fever, that was sweeping the nation. So if we look back, in 1817, the state of New York began this major project to connect its eastern ports all the way with Lake Erie in the west.
The Erie Canal.
Exactly. And that caused an absolute stir in Pennsylvania. I mean, they began this major push to build canals across their own state, mostly fueled by these intense fears that New York would completely threaten commerce in Philadelphia.
Oh, they were terrified of being economically stranded.
Completely. And it reached a boiling point on March 27, 1824, when Governor Andrew Schultz actually appointed the first 3 Pennsylvania canal commissioners. And he charged them with this urgent task of finding a viable canal route connecting Lancaster and Chester counties all the way to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that canal fever ran incredibly high among the state's business leaders. It was pure, unfiltered fear of missing out, FOMO.
The ultimate 19th century FOMO.
Exactly. Because, the conventional narrative is that infrastructure is a slow, methodical process. But in the 1820s, it was a frenzy. These local business leaders realized that if they didn't act immediately, they were just going to become economically irrelevant.
Which brings us perfectly to the mission of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we are zooming in on how this intense statewide canal fever played out in microcosm.
Right.
We've gone through the historical records, the legal documents, and old newspaper clippings to trace the really dramatic boom and bust story of the Conestoga Navigation Company in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We're going to look at the wild engineering hacks they used, the fortunes that were made and lost, and what it tells us about the real cost of progress.
And Lancaster in the 1820s is really the perfect case study to show you this, because it was a bustling, very prosperous inland hub, but it was completely landlocked when it came to heavy freight.
Right.
The primary market for all their agricultural goods was Baltimore, and to get down there, they had to rely on these overland wagons.
Which meant dragging massive, heavy wooden carts through rutted mud tracks. I mean, we're talking about broken axles, exhausted horses, and taking literally weeks to move a fraction of what, a single boat could carry.
Exactly. It was so inefficient. So local leaders, desperate to boost the economy, hold this massive public meeting in May 1824. And by March of 1825, they actually successfully petition the state.
Wow, it's fast.
Super fast. They get a company incorporated to make the meandering Conestoga River navigable all the way down to the Susquehanna River at Safe Harbor. They needed a water highway, and they basically needed it yesterday.
But, wanting a canal and actually building one on a winding, shallow creek are two fundamentally different things, because the Conestoga was not some deep, placid waterway.
No, not at all.
It dropped roughly 64 feet over its 18-mile journey. So if you put a heavy cargo-laden barge on that, it would scrape bottom or just get smashed to pieces in the rapids.
The elevation drop and those rocky shallows were huge hurdles. Because normally, in a standard project like the Erie Canal, engineers would just dig a long, separate trench parallel to the river and divert water into it.
Right, a traditional canal.
Yeah. But the topography here and the sheer cost made a traditional trench totally impossible. So they utilized this brilliant engineering concept called slackwater navigation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because slackwater navigation is essentially an engineering hack for nature, right? Yeah. Instead of fighting the river's downward flow, you manipulate its depth. It's almost like Well, like building a giant water staircase or an escalator for boats.
That is a great analogy. That captures the mechanics perfectly. What the engineers did was build a series of 9 dam and lock combinations across the entire width of the river.
Okay.
By choking the natural flow, these dams force the water to pile up behind them, forming these long, deep, placid ponds that were about 4 feet deep.
Right, and the spacing had to be meticulously calculated, didn't it?
Right.
The water behind one dam had to back up all the way to the base of the next dam upstream.
Exactly.
So they basically turned a fast, shallow creek into a continuous chain of still lakes. And to transition a barge from one lake down to the next, as you take the staircase down, they built locks directly into the sides of these dams.
And these weren't small locks either. They were massive wooden chambers, 100 feet long and 22 feet wide. So a boat floats in, the heavy wooden gates close behind it, and the water is just slowly drained out to match the level of the river below.
And then the bottom gates open, and the boat just continues on its way.
Precisely.
But, and this is a big but, we have to talk about the collateral damage of turning a river into a staircase. Because the Conestoga wasn't just empty before this project began, it was already dotted with grist mills.
Right, the local infrastructure that was already there.
Yeah, these local businesses that relied entirely on the natural fast flow of the river to turn their water wheels and grind grain.
And this is where the new engineering really clashes with the existing economy, because a water wheel relied on something called a tail race.
A tail race, okay?
Yeah, that's the channel that carries the water away from the wheel after it's done its work. When the navigation company built their dams and raised the water levels, they inadvertently flooded those tail races.
Oh no, so the backed up water would just drown the water wheels.
Exactly. It made the existing mills entirely useless. They couldn't turn.
Which means the company couldn't just come in and build. They had to buy out the competition. Looking at the records, they spent over $20,000, which was a massive fortune back then, just purchasing existing mills like Lights Mill and Haversticks just to secure the water rights and prevent, endless lawsuits.
It was an incredible financial gamble right out of the gate. And honestly, there's a really rich irony in who they hired to actually construct this intricate system.
Oh, yes. The contractor. Keep in mind, this entire project, this canal fever, was born out of a fierce, almost hostile rivalry with New York.
Right.
Pennsylvania leaders loathed New York's rising dominance. So who gets the massive $53,240 construction contract for this patriotic Pennsylvania water highway?
A contractor from New York.
A guy named Caleb Hamill from New York. And he was actually recommended by New York Governor DeWitt Clinton himself, the architect of the Erie Canal.
It's unbelievable.
It really just goes to show that in the cutthroat world of 19th century capitalism, the lowest bid speaks much louder than any kind of interstate pride.
Oh, absolutely. But to his credit, Hamill and his engineers actually delivered. By the spring of 1829, the liquid staircase was complete, the Conestoga Navigation Company opens for business, and the initial economic impact was just staggering.
Yeah, transporting goods became drastically cheaper and exponentially faster. Let's look at the actual logistics from the source data, because this is where the economic shift becomes really tangible.
Go for it.
So whiskey was a huge cash crop for Pennsylvania farmers. Suddenly, you could take a hogshead of whiskey, which is a massive wooden barrel holding almost 65 gallons loaded onto a barge in Lancaster, float it down the Conestoga, across the Susquehanna, and all the way down the bay to Baltimore for just $1.50, or to Philadelphia for $1.75.
It completely changed the game.
But wait, let me push back on the economics of that for a second. If they spent tens of thousands of dollars buying up mills, plus a $53,000 construction contract, how on earth is the company making a profit by charging $1.50 to move a massive barrel to another state? The margins seem impossibly thin.
It's a great question. It's a volume game, pure and simple, and it relies heavily on controlling a monopoly route. The $1.50 wasn't just a flat shipping fee. It included the tolls that they charged at every single lock.
Ah, okay. The lock tolls add up.
Exactly. Because they made the journey so incredibly cheap compared to the overland wagons, virtually every farmer and merchant in the region abandoned the turnpikes. They put everything on the water. But the real profit wasn't actually just in exporting the whiskey and grain. It was in the inbound freight.
The raw materials coming back into the city.
Yes. The cost of heavy commodities like coal and lumber absolutely plummeted in Lancaster. The records show that coal delivered by the navigation company sold for 50 to 75 cents cheaper per ton than it did at the overland hubs. And when a city suddenly gets access to cheap energy and cheap building materials, its entire industrial capacity just explodes.
That paints a very gritty industrial picture, though. Barges full of coal, rough timber, whiskey barrels. But I have to ask, was it purely industrial? Did everyday people actually experience this waterway?
Oh, they definitely did. The recreational aspect was actually massive. In 1828, they launched the Red Rover, which was the very first packet boat in Pennsylvania.
A packet boat is essentially a passenger ferry.
Right.
Right, designed specifically for canals.
Exactly. But the absolute crown jewel was a 75-foot-long steamboat simply named the Conestoga. And the accounts of this steamer are incredible. It featured these separate, really elegant cabins for ladies and gentlemen.
Like floating parlors.
Yes. You could board at the head of the navigation in Lancaster. The steam engine is churning. There's a brass band playing on the deck.
A brass band.
A literal brass band. And you just glide smoothly over these deep manufactured ponds, completely bypassing the muddy, miserable turnpikes.
That must have felt like living in the future for them.
It really did. The local press heralded the whole canal as a monument of our genius and enterprise. The investors truly believed they had conquered nature and secured their economic destiny permanently.
But for all this luxury and economic dominance, the architects of the system ignored one glaring fatal flaw. They didn't actually control the water supply.
Right.
I mean, slackwater navigation uses the river itself, and rivers are entirely at the mercy of the watershed.
And in the winter of 1832, the river abruptly reminded them who was actually in charge. Just 3 years after they opened, the region experienced a severe ice flood.
Now, for anyone listening who hasn't lived near a major northern river, an ice flood is uniquely terrifying. It is not just high water.
No, it's so much worse.
It happens when a river freezes solid during a bitter cold snap. And then a sudden thaw or a heavy rain upstream causes the water level to surge rapidly underneath the ice. And the pressure just snaps the solid ice sheet into these massive jagged chunks.
Right.
You suddenly have millions of pounds of ice hurtling downstream, riding the crest of a flood and acting like relentless battering rams.
And waiting right in the path of those battering rams were the 9 wooden and stone dams of the Conestoga Navigation Company.
Ouch.
Yeah. The 1832 ice flood absolutely devastated the infrastructure. It smashed the dams to pieces, it ruined the wooden lock gates, and of course it drained those manufactured ponds. The entire liquid staircase was just completely destroyed.
So the barges are grounded in mud, that luxury steamship is suddenly useless, and the toll revenue drops to absolute zero instantly.
Overnight.
Now, from a modern business perspective, you look at a completely destroyed infrastructure project and assume, well, the investor's going to cut their losses, right? The river won, the experiment fails, it's time to move on. Did they fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy?
Oh, completely. Human psychology, especially when it's tangled up with intense civic pride and millions in modern equivalent capital, it rarely works rationally. The investors were trapped by that sunk cost fallacy. Instead of liquidating and walking away, the company doubled down.
Of course they did.
They borrowed heavily from local banks, they mortgaged all their properties, the grist mills they bought, the land for the tow paths, and they desperately tried to rebuild.
But I'm guessing it wasn't enough. The repair bills mounted, the debt compounded, and by 1833, the entire multi-million-dollar dream collapses. They end up facing a sheriff's sale.
Right. Which in that era meant a total public liquidation of the dream. Everything. The broken dams, the lock, the water rights, the land is all put on the auction block.
The original investors lost everything. And the entire empire gets scooped up by 2 brothers, William and Edward Coleman, for a mere $17,500.
Pennies on the dollar.
Absolute pennies. They bought an empire at a massive discount. And Edward Coleman, who actually soon bought out his brother, he didn't just patch up the broken dams. He decided to expand the whole thing.
He had a vision.
He poured another $120,000 of his own money into the system. He reduced the number of dams from 9 to 7 to make it more efficient, and he built them higher.
Much higher. At one location, which was literally named Slackwater, he raised the dam to a towering height of 20 feet and 3 inches.
Which raises a massive legal and geographical question for me. If you build a 20-foot dam on a river, the water backing up behind it is going to create a massive reservoir, right?
Oh, yeah.
It is going to drown surrounding farmland and drastically alter the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So how did a single private businessman secure the power to just flood his neighbor's lands?
Well, that points directly to the immense political power of these canal barons in the 1830s. Corporate charters for infrastructure projects often came with incredibly broad powers of eminent domain.
Of course.
The state viewed these canals as vital public utilities, even when they were completely privately owned. So Coleman legally purchased the right to flood properties. And if the farmers resisted, the legal framework of the time heavily favored industrial progress over individual property rights. So he forms a new corporation in 1837 and rebuilds the system stronger than ever.
And he doesn't even stop there. By 1840, he achieves the ultimate logistical connection. The massive Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal opens up on the opposite side of the Susquehanna River. To connect his local canal to this new interstate highway, Coleman builds a crib dam across the Susquehanna itself.
A crib dam is a really fascinating piece of engineering, by the way. It's essentially a massive framework of heavy timber built sort of like a long log cabin directly in the water.
Right.
And then they fill it with tons of crushed stone to weigh it down and create a solid barrier. This raised the water level just enough that canal boats could be towed directly from the mouth of the Conestoga right into the Maryland Canal system.
A direct, unbroken water highway straight to the ocean. So he overcomes the ice floods, he legally dominates the landscape with eminent domain, and he connects to the national grid. I mean, surely now he succeeds, right? The system is finally secure.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, he defeated the river, sure, but he couldn't defeat progress. By the mid-1850s, a new technology arrived that completely dismantled the entire logic of the canal system.
The railroad.
The railroad.
The iron horse. It is staggering how quickly canal fever broke. I mean, canals went from the most vital, cutting-edge technology on Earth to total obsolescence in just a handful of years.
Because the railroad solved every single vulnerability of the slackwater system, trains did not freeze in the winter, they didn't dry up in a summer drought, they were completely immune to ice floods, and most importantly, they were fast.
Yeah, a locomotive could move freight in hours that would take a barge pulled by a mule days to navigate.
Exactly. So the very same business leaders who had moved heaven and earth, who bought up mills and fought the river, they simply walked away. They saw the year-round reliability of the railroad and instantly shifted their capital.
The decline was just so rapid.
Yeah.
By 1856, those luxurious steamer operations we talked about, they ceased entirely. By 1857, the navigation company stopped functioning as a viable commercial route. Maintenance was ignored, the locks rotted, and history basically repeated itself. In 1866, the company faced another sheriff sale.
And do you know what it sold for this time?
Tell me.
The entire system was sold off for just $10,000.
$10,000. From an initial $53,000 construction bid to a $120,000 massive rebuild by Coleman, back down to a $10,000 liquidation. And the buyers in 1866, they weren't even trying to run a transportation business, were they?
No, not at all. They bought it strictly for salvage. They sold off the land. They used a few of the remaining dams for local mill power, and they just dismantled the grand vision piece by piece.
So for you listening, if you want to know what the physical legacy of this landscape-altering project is today, like if you walk along the Conestoga River in Lancaster right now, what remains of the Great Water Staircase?
Honestly, Mother Nature has reclaimed almost all of it. But if you know what you were looking for, the ghosts of the infrastructure are still there. In certain parts of the river, you'll see these riffles, shallow, rocky rapids.
Okay.
Those are often the old stone foundations of the dams sitting just beneath the surface.
Essentially acting as natural speed bumps in the water.
Precisely. And there are a few tangible ruins left. Portions of Lock 2 remain on private property. You can actually find the ruins of Lock 8 in a public park along the riverbank. And near the Rock Hill Road Bridge, the massive dressed stones of Dam and Lock 5 are still there, just covered in moss, quietly sitting by the water.
It is genuinely haunting to think about the sheer scale of human effort involved in all of this. The legislative battles, the thousands of dollars poured into buyouts, the brass bands playing on the deck of a steamer, all of it reduced to a few mossy rocks in a local park.
Yeah.
It makes you step back and look at the whole arc of the story, doesn't it? It began with that intense, FOMO-induced canal fever of 1824, driven by the absolute dread of being left behind by New York. We saw the incredible ingenuity of the slackwater system, turning a shallow creek into a navigable staircase.
Right, the engineering hack.
Exactly. We witnessed the economic boom, the dirt-cheap coal, the sheer luxury of passenger travel. But then came the brutal reality check of the ice floods, the sunk cost fallacy that bankrupted the original investors, and then the ruthless power of the canal barons who rebuilt it. And finally, after overcoming every geographical and legal hurdle imaginable, the entire system was rendered entirely useless by the arrival of the railroad.
It is a profound cycle, and I think it leaves us with a really important reflection on how we view our own technological eras today. The creators of the Conestoga Navigation Company called their work a monument of our genius and enterprise. They were absolutely convinced they had built a permanent, ultimate solution to their economic challenges, yet their great monument was entirely obsolete in less than 3 decades.
Less than 30 years from cutting edge to scrap wood. I mean, that is a blink of an eye in the span of history. It really highlights the psychology of feverish investing. Because when a society falls in love with a new technology, we completely lose our perspective on its permanence.
Which is exactly the lingering thought you should take away from this. Just look at the massive investments happening right now. We are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into data centers, artificial intelligence infrastructure, brand new transit models. As we watch these modern empires being constructed all around us, we have to ask ourselves, what current fever are we caught up in? What are we building today, totally convinced of its permanent brilliance, that will just be a pile of ruins, a few mossy rocks in the stream of history in a few short decades?
A perfectly unsettling question to leave you with as you look at the modern world around you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the cost of progress. We will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.